The Lion of Allah, a warrior's legacy. A man like Hamza does not fall in battle, he ascends. The scorching Arabian sun hung low over the golden dunes as the wind whispered secrets of an impending storm. The streets of Mecca, usually buzzing with merchants and traders, carried an uneasy tension. The world was changing. And at the center of this storm was one man, Hazrat Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib R.A., the uncle of Prophet Muhammad SAW, a warrior unlike any other. Feared by his enemies and loved by his people, Hamza was not just any warrior. He was Asadullah, the Lion of Allah. His tale was one of bravery, faith, and ultimate sacrifice, a story that would inspire generations to come. The birth of a warrior. From a young age, Hamza was different. He was strong, bold, and fiercely protective of those he loved. As a child, he roamed the vast deserts, his keen eyes spotting prey long before others could. With his bow in hand, he became the greatest hunter in all of Mecca. The people admired him, the Quraysh feared him, and his name alone was enough to send chills down the spine of any warrior. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Hamza set out on a hunt. He moved through the desert like a shadow, his bowstring taut, ready to strike. Suddenly, a strange movement caught his eye. A majestic deer stood still, staring at him, its eyes glowing under the moonlight. Hamza. The voice was soft yet commanding. Startled, he stepped back. The deer had spoken. Your strength is not just for the hunt. It is for a greater battle. A war that will decide the fate of mankind. A shiver ran down Hamza's spine. Was this a dream? A vision? He had faced the fiercest beasts, but never had he felt such an overwhelming sense of destiny. He left the hunt that night, troubled, unaware that his life was about to change forever. A lion awakened. Years passed, and Mecca was divided. The message of Islam was spreading, led by Prophet Muhammad SAW. The Quraysh, desperate to stop him, used every means possible, ridicule, torture, and even threats of death. One fateful day, Hamza returned from a hunting expedition, his quiver full, his mind lost in thought. As he entered Mecca, a panicked servant girl ran to him. Master Hamza, they struck your nephew. Abu Jahl humiliated him in front of the Kaaba. A deep growl escaped his throat. Without a word, he stormed into the marketplace. The Quraysh turned to see him, his presence alone enough to silence the crowd. He walked straight to Abu Jahl, whose smug expression disappeared as Hamza raised his bow and struck him hard across the face. How dare you lay a hand on Muhammad SAW? Hamza roared, his voice echoing through the market. Abu Jahl, blood dripping from his lip, stared in shock. This was not a challenge he could win. From this moment, Hamza declared, I stand with Muhammad SAW and his message. The silence that followed was deafening. The Quraysh had lost their greatest warrior. The Muslims had gained their mightiest protector. The turning point. Islam grew stronger with Hamza by the Prophet's side. His presence alone made the enemies hesitate. But with strength came trials. Battles loomed on the horizon, and the Quraysh were preparing for war. At the Battle of Badr, Hamza fought like a lion unleashed. His sword tore through enemy ranks, his courage unshaken. But victory came at a cost. The Quraysh now saw him as their greatest threat, and threats had to be eliminated. Unknown to Hamza, a dark plot was brewing. Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, thirsted for revenge. She sought out Washer, a skilled Ethiopian slave, promising him freedom in exchange for one task, kill Hamza. The ultimate betrayal. The day of the Battle of Uhud arrived. The mountains of Uhud stood tall as blood and steel clashed beneath them. Hamza fought fearlessly, cutting through the enemy like a storm. But in the chaos, a shadow lurked. Washer, hidden behind a boulder, watched Hamza's every move. His grip tightened on his spear. He had only one shot. Then, in the blink of an eye, the spear flew through the air, straight into Hamza's chest. The Lion of Allah staggered but did not fall. He turned, eyes burning with fury, but his strength was fading. With one last breath, he roared, then collapsed onto the battlefield. From a distance, Prophet Muhammad saw his beloved uncle fall. A pain unlike any other gripped his heart. A legacy that never dies. When the dust settled, the battlefield was quiet. Hamza's body lay among the martyrs, his sacrifice eternal. But his story did not end there. His courage, his faith, and his unwavering strength lived on. To this day, the name Hazrat Hamza, R.A., echoes through history. A warrior, a believer, a lion whose roar still shakes the hearts of those who stand for truth. The Lion of Allah had fallen, but his legacy would never die. A lion is born, Hazrat Hamza's early life. The desert wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the scent of sand and distant rain. Under the vast Arabian sky, a boy ran barefoot across the golden dunes, his laughter ringing out as he chased a falcon that had just taken flight. His movements were swift, his determination unwavering. Even at a young age, Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib was unlike any other child in Mecca. His mother, Halima, often said, "This boy was born with the heart of a lion." And she was right. The blood of leaders. Born into the noble Banu Hashim clan, Hamza was the son of Abdul Muttalib, the revered leader of Mecca. His lineage traced back to Ibrahim A.S., and he carried himself with the same dignity and strength as his ancestors. Mecca in those days was a city of power, wealth, and deep-rooted tribal honor. The Quraysh, proud and mighty, ruled the city with an iron grip, but even among them, the Hashim family stood tall. And in the heart of that family was young Hamza, a child who would soon become a legend. Yet, what set him apart was not just his noble blood. It was his unyielding spirit, his unshakable loyalty, and a fire in his eyes that never dimmed. A brother in arms. From the very beginning, Hamza shared an unbreakable bond with his nephew, Muhammad ibn Abdullah Saw. Though Muhammad Saw was younger, the two boys were inseparable. They climbed the rugged hills of Mecca together, raced through its narrow streets, and sat under the stars, dreaming of the world beyond. One evening, after a long day of training with the other boys, Hamza and Muhammad Saw lay on the soft sands outside the city, staring at the endless night sky. "Do you ever wonder what lies beyond these stars?" Muhammad Saw asked. Hamza smirked. "Why wonder? When I'm older, I'll ride across the deserts and find out for myself." Muhammad Saw smiled but remained silent. Even then, there was a mystery in his eyes, a depth that Hamza often noticed but never questioned. Little did Hamza know, his beloved nephew was destined for something far greater than any desert adventure. The making of a warrior. As Hamza grew older, his strength became the talk of Mecca. He was taller than most men, his body carved with the hard-earned muscle of a warrior. While others spent their days in the markets, Hamza trained. He honed his skills in archery, perfecting his aim until he could shoot a bird mid-flight. He wrestled the strongest men in the city and left them gasping in the dust. He rode across the desert, his spear slicing through the wind. By the time he reached adulthood, there was no warrior in Mecca who could match his skill with a sword or his prowess in battle. The Quraysh whispered among themselves, "If war ever comes, let it be Hamza who leads us." But Hamza was not just a fighter, he was a hunter. He roamed the wilderness for days, tracking his prey through the silent dunes. He had no fear of the wild, for he himself was the wild. It was during one such hunting trip that he had his first encounter with destiny. A fateful encounter. One night, deep in the desert, Hamza stalked a massive lion that had been terrorizing the outskirts of Mecca. The beast was cunning, its roars shaking the ground as it prowled through the darkness. Hamza waited, his spear poised, his breath steady. Then, with a sudden leap, the lion charged. The battle was fierce. Claws met steel, roars met war cries. The desert bore witness to a struggle of sheer will. Blood soaked the sand. And then silence. Hamza stood victorious, his chest heaving, the great lion lying still at his feet. As he wiped the blood from his blade, a strange thought crossed his mind. Why did this battle feel different? It was not the lion he had conquered that night. It was himself. The lion returns to Mecca. When Hamza returned to Mecca, carrying the lion's pelt over his shoulder, the people gathered around in awe. "No man can face a lion and survive," they whispered. But Hamza barely heard them. His mind was restless. The thrill of the hunt, the rush of the battle, it was no longer enough. That night, he visited his nephew Muhammad Saw, who now spent more and more time in prayer and solitude. "There's something stirring within me, Muhammad," Hamza admitted, staring into the flickering lamplight. "Something beyond the hunt, beyond the fight." Muhammad Saw looked at him with knowing eyes. "Perhaps," he said softly, "you are meant to fight for something greater than yourself." Hamza did not understand those words then, but soon he would. A storm on the horizon. As the years passed, Mecca became a city divided. Muhammad Saw had begun calling people to a new faith, Islam. The Quraysh were enraged. They saw this as a threat to their power, and they would stop at nothing to silence him. Hamza, despite his love for his nephew, stayed neutral. He was a warrior, not a man of politics or religion. But deep inside, something kept pulling him toward Muhammad's Saw words. Then came the day that changed everything. The day Abu Jahl struck Muhammad Saw in public, humiliating him before the people of Mecca. When Hamza heard of it, his blood boiled. He stormed through the marketplace, his bow still in hand from a recent hunt, and without a word, he struck Abu Jahl across the face, drawing blood. "How dare you harm Muhammad?" Hamza roared. "From this day on, I stand with him." The Quraysh gasped. The Lion of Mecca had chosen his side, and the battle for faith had truly begun. A mysterious encounter, the talking deer. The desert stretched endlessly before him, bathed in the golden light of a dying sun. Hazrat Hamza R.A. rode alone, his bow slung across his back, his spear resting at his side. The wind whispered through the dunes, carrying with it the distant howl of wolves. But the Lion of Mecca was not afraid. He had faced beasts before, had stared into the eyes of death, and had always emerged victorious. Yet this night was different. Something unseen pulled at his soul, an unease he could not name. He had left Mecca that morning with a restless heart, seeking solace in the wilderness. The city had changed, Muhammad Saw, had begun preaching openly. The Quraysh were enraged, and Hamza himself felt caught between two worlds. He loved his nephew deeply, but the call of Islam was still a mystery to him. That was when he saw it, the deer. The hunt begins. The animal stood atop a distant ridge, its coat shimmering like silver in the moonlight. A magnificent creature, unlike any Hamza had seen before. A slow smile tugged at his lips. A challenge. Without hesitation, he slid off his horse, moving swiftly and silently through the sand. His fingers tightened around his bow as he nocked an arrow. One clean shot, and the hunt would be over. He took aim. But before he could release, the deer turned and locked eyes with him. A strange stillness filled the air. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the deer spoke. "O Hamza, son of Abdul Muttalib, why do you seek to kill me?" The impossible moment. Hamza's grip faltered. His breath caught in his throat. A talking deer? Impossible. He shook his head, took a step back. His warrior instinct screamed at him. This was sorcery, a trick of the desert. But deep in his heart, something told him this was no ordinary moment. What are you?" Hamza demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. The deer lowered his head, as if bowing to something unseen. "I am but a creature of Allah, sent to remind you of the path that awaits you. You are a hunter, O Hamza, but your greatest hunt is not for prey, it is for truth." A cold shiver ran down Hamza's spine. "Truth," he repeated. "Yes." The deer's voice was gentle, yet it echoed in the night like thunder. "You seek strength in the hunt, but true strength lies in submission to the one who created all things. The time will come when you must choose your side, O Lion of Mecca. Will you stand with the oppressors, or will you fight for justice?" The words struck deep, too deep. For the first time in his life, Hamza felt as though his strength, his skill, his warrior's pride, none of it meant anything. He had fought men, beasts, and even his own fears, but now he stood before something he could not conquer with a sword. Himself. A warning and a prophecy. The deer turned to leave, its hooves barely making a sound on the sand. "Wait." Hamza called out, his heart pounding. Tell me who sent you. The deer paused, glancing back once more. You already know, it said softly. Then, before Hamza could blink, the deer vanished into the desert mist, as if it had never been there at all. Silence. Only the stars bore witness to what had just occurred. Hamza stood there for a long time, his bow hanging loosely at his side, his mind racing. He had lived his life by the sword, but something greater was at play here. Something beyond war, beyond bloodshed. Something divine. The return to Mecca. When he finally returned to Mecca, the city seemed different. Or perhaps he was different. The words of the deer echoed in his mind. The hunt for truth. The choice he would have to make. Then, as he walked through the marketplace, he heard the whispers. Did you hear? Abu Jahl attacked Muhammad today. Struck him in front of everyone. Hamza froze. The choice was here. Without a second thought, he gripped his bow and stormed toward the Kaaba, where Abu Jahl sat boasting of his cruelty. And before the gathered Quraysh, in the heart of Mecca itself, Hamza struck him down and declared his loyalty to Islam. It was the first step on a journey that would change history forever. But deep in his heart, he knew this journey had begun long before. Perhaps in the eyes of a silver-coated deer on a moonlit desert night. The moment of truth. Hazrat Hamza accepts Islam. The streets of Mecca were alive with murmurs that day. Merchants bartered, travelers arrived from distant lands, and the scent of spices and baked bread filled the air. But beneath the hum of daily life, something dark was brewing, an oppression that had been growing like a storm on the horizon. The followers of Muhammad suffered daily at the hands of the Quraysh. Men and women were tortured for their faith. Some were beaten, others starved. The city that once thrived on honor now reeked of cruelty. And at the center of it all stood Abu Jahl, the fiercest enemy of Islam. But he had made a grave mistake that day. He had dared to raise his hand against Muhammad, and he had done so in broad daylight in front of witnesses. One of those witnesses was about to change history forever. The eyewitness. Deep in the desert, Hazrat Hamza, R.A., rode back toward Mecca, his mind restless. It had been days since his strange encounter with the deer, yet the words still haunted him. The hunt for truth. Will you fight for justice? He shook the thought away. He was a warrior, a hunter, a man of strength. He had no time for riddles. But as he entered the city, a slave girl rushed to him, breathless and wide-eyed. "Oh, Abu Umarah," she called, using his title. "You must hear what has happened." Hamza frowned. "What is it?" The girl hesitated, looking around nervously before whispering. "Your nephew, Muhammad, was attacked. Abu Jahl struck him today, mocked him, humiliated him, and no one dared to stop him." Silence. Hamza's grip on his bow tightened. He did what? His voice was a dangerous whisper. He struck him, right by the Kaaba, and he laughed while doing it, as if it were a game. Something inside Hamza snapped. The blood of Abdul Muttalib ran hot in his veins. His breath came in slow, controlled bursts, the kind of calm before a storm. Without another word, he turned on his heels and marched toward the Kaaba. The people in the marketplace saw him coming, and they knew. This was not just Hazrat Hamza, the hunter. This was the Lion of Mecca. The confrontation. The Quraysh sat near the Kaaba, laughing, boasting, enjoying their day. And at the center of them, Abu Jahl sat like a king on his throne. His laughter filled the air, until a shadow loomed over him. The laughter died. The air grew heavy. Hazrat Hamza stood before him, gripping his bow. His presence alone was enough to send a chill through the gathering. The man was a legend, a warrior who had never lost a battle. Abu Jahl. Hamza's voice was like steel. The chief of the Quraysh looked up, smirking. "Ah, Hamza, what brings you?" The bow crashed against Abu Jahl's face. A gasp ran through the crowd. Blood splattered the sand. Abu Jahl staggered, his hand clutching his face in shock. "How dare you?" Hamza's voice thundered. "You strike Muhammad? You lay hands on my nephew, knowing full well he is under my protection." Abu Jahl spat blood. "Are you defending him now, Hamza? Have you too become a follower of his madness? The words should have made Hamza pause. But they didn't. Something inside him had already decided. He looked around at the gathered Quraysh, men who had once been his allies, his comrades. And for the first time, he saw them for what they were: tyrants, oppressors, men who feared the truth. And in that moment, Hamza knew where he truly belonged. He lifted his chin, his voice strong and unwavering. "Yes," he declared, "I am with Muhammad, and I say before all of you today, I have accepted his faith." A stunned silence. No one had expected this. 1 moment ago, Hamza was just an angry uncle seeking vengeance. Now he had become something far more dangerous, a warrior of Islam. A new path. That night, Hazrat Hamza, R.A., stood before Prophet Muhammad saw. "You have come," the Prophet said softly. Hamza exhaled, for the first time feeling peace in his heart. "I have always fought for honor," he admitted, "for strength, for power. But today I fought for something greater." The Prophet saw, smiled. "And that, O Hamza, is what makes you truly strong." The Lion of Allah had been awakened, and the enemies of Islam would soon tremble. The turning point. Hazrat Hamza as Islam's shield. The streets of Mecca had changed. Where once the Muslims walked in fear, now they walked with newfound confidence. Where once they hid in shadows, now they stood tall, because they were no longer alone. They had a shield. They had Hazrat Hamza, R.A. The Quraysh had long ruled through fear. They had beaten the weak, humiliated the helpless, and silenced the voices of those who dared to speak the truth. But with Hamza's acceptance of Islam, that fear had begun to shift, and this terrified them, because Hamza was not a man they could silence. The unbreakable wall. One afternoon, as the sun scorched the sands of Mecca, a small group of Muslims gathered near the Kaaba for prayer. Among them stood Prophet Muhammad SAW, his presence calm and resolute. The Quraysh watched from a distance, their eyes burning with hatred. "Who dares pray so openly?" sneered Abu Sufyan. "They grow bolder," muttered another. Then Abu Lahab stepped forward. "Let's remind them who rules Mecca," he growled. The group of Quraysh men marched toward the Muslims, their intentions clear. But before they could reach them, a towering figure stepped between them. Hazrat Hamza. He stood there, broad-shouldered and unshaken, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Enough," he said. The Quraysh stopped. Some exchanged nervous glances. Hamza alone was equal to 10 men in battle. Abu Lahab scowled. "Will you raise your sword against your own tribe, Hamza?" Hazrat Hamza's eyes hardened. "If my tribe stands for oppression, then I stand against it." The Quraysh hesitated. For the first time, they felt the weight of their own actions. They were no longer attacking the weak. They were now facing a warrior. Without another word, they turned and walked away. It was a silent victory, but it was a turning point. That day, Mecca learned something new. As long as Hamza stood, Islam would not fall. The price of defiance. The news spread quickly. Hazrat Hamza had become the shield of Islam. He defended the Muslims, walked alongside them, and challenged the Quraysh without fear. And so, the Quraysh devised a new strategy. They would break Hazrat Hamza. One evening, he was ambushed in the marketplace. 3 men surrounded him, armed and ready. "Turn back, Hamza," one of them hissed. "You still have time. Leave Muhammad, and we will forgive everything." Hamza smirked. "You should have brought more men." Then he struck. His fist landed hard, sending the first man crashing to the ground. Before the second could react, Hamza spun and slammed his elbow into his ribs. The third attacker lunged with a dagger, but Hamza caught his wrist mid-air. With one swift motion, he disarmed him and threw him to the ground. The marketplace fell silent. People watched, whispering. The message was clear. Hamza would not break. The 3 attackers crawled away, humiliated. And from that day, no one dared to challenge him again. The Prophet's protector. One night, Prophet Muhammad sat in deep thought. His message was spreading, but so was the resistance. Hazrat Hamza, R.A., entered and knelt beside him. "You seem troubled, my brother," he said. The prophet looked at him with a gentle smile. "There is much to be done, Hamza. The Quraysh will not stop. The oppression will grow worse." Hazrat Hamza placed his hand on his sword. "Then let them come," he said. "As long as I breathe, they will not harm you." The prophet sighed. "It is not me I worry for, but my people." Hazrat Hamza nodded. "Then I will protect them too." From that moment on, Hazrat Hamza, R.A., became more than just a warrior. He became the shield of Islam. A lion's roar. With Hazrat Hamza, R.A., by their side, the Muslims began to walk the streets with less fear. When Bilal, R.A., was dragged across burning sands, Hamza stood over him like a guardian. When young Muslims were mocked in the marketplace, Hamza was there to silence their tormentors. When the Quraysh whispered of assassination, Hamza was already watching, waiting. One day, Abu Sufyan gathered his men. "We must stop him," he said. "If we do not, Islam will only grow stronger." And so a plot was born, a plot that would lead to one of the greatest battles in Islamic history. The Battle of Badr. The lion in battle, his heroic battles. The scorching desert wind carried the sound of beating war drums. The warriors of Mecca stood in formation, their weapons gleaming under the sun. Across the battlefield, the Muslims stood firm, fewer in number but stronger in spirit. And at the front of the Muslim army stood Hazrat Hamza, R.A., clad in armor, a bold feather in his helmet, and his sword resting on his shoulder. He was a sight that struck both awe and terror. This was the Battle of Badr, the first great clash between truth and falsehood. And Hazrat Hamza was ready to carve his name into history. The duel that shook Badr. As the battle began, 3 warriors from the Quraysh stepped forward. They were among Mecca's fiercest fighters, Utbah ibn Rabi'a, his brother Shayba, and his son Walid. Their eyes burned with arrogance as they demanded an equal fight. 3 Muslim warriors stepped forward, but the Quraysh sneered. "We will not fight these men. Send forth those who are our equals." Utbah called. A deep voice answered, "Then face us." Hazrat Hamza, Hazrat Ali, and Ubaidah ibn Harith stepped forward. The crowd murmured. The Quraysh warriors shifted uneasily. This was not what they had expected. Hazrat Hamza locked eyes with Shayba. He saw something there, hesitation, fear. "Come, Shayba," Hazrat Hamza said, gripping his sword. "Let us see who is truly strong." The duel began. Shayba lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air. Hamza dodged with ease, his movements sharp as a lion in the hunt. With a swift motion, he struck one powerful slash, and Shayba fell. Utbah and Walid fought fiercely against Hazrat Ali and Ubaidah, but Hazrat Ali swiftly overpowered Walid, and Ubaidah, though wounded, stood victorious with Ali's aid. The Quraysh watched in horror, their strongest warriors defeated within moments. The tides of battle had turned. The lion unleashed. The duels had set the battlefield ablaze. With a mighty roar, the Muslim army charged forward. Hazrat Hamza was at the heart of the fight. His sword struck down enemy after enemy. The Quraysh feared him more than any man on the battlefield. His movements were swift, his strikes were devastating. Every time he swung his sword, a warrior fell. "It's him," a Quraysh fighter gasped. "The one with the feather, Hamza." "Stay away from him," another warned. But no one could escape him. The Quraysh tried to surround him, but Hamza fought like a lion cornered. He knocked one soldier aside, spun to strike another, and roared, "Is this all the might of Mecca?" His enemies hesitated. They had never seen such strength. Even the leaders of the Quraysh, Abu Sufyan, Abu Jahl, watched in stunned silence. "If men like Hamza stand with Muhammad," one whispered, "how can we ever defeat them?" The moment that decided the war. As the battle raged on, Hazrat Hamza saw an opportunity. Abu Jahl, the chief of the Quraysh and the greatest enemy of Islam, stood at the center of the battlefield, barking orders. If he falls, the Quraysh will crumble, Hamza realized. With a warrior's instinct, he charged through the enemy lines. But just as he neared Abu Jahl, a dozen Quraysh soldiers blocked his path. Hamza did not stop. One by one, he cut them down. Sword clashed against sword, steel met flesh. The battlefield was chaos, but Hamza moved through it like a storm, relentless and unstoppable. By the time he reached Abu Jahl, the enemy leader was already wounded. Young Muadh ibn Amr had struck him down, and now another warrior, Abdullah ibn Masudi, was closing in to finish him. Abu Jahl's eyes widened in horror as he saw Hazrat Hamza towering over him. "You have lost, Abu Jahl," Hamza declared. The Quraysh leader tried to speak, but no words came. He had spent years tormenting the Muslims, believing them weak. Now, he lay defeated at their feet. The battle was over. The Quraysh, leaderless and broken, fled the battlefield. Victory and the legend of a lion. As the dust settled, the Muslims stood victorious. The Prophet Muhammad surveyed the battlefield, his heart filled with gratitude. He turned to Hazrat Hamza and said, "Today you have roared like a lion, and the world will never forget it." Hazrat Hamza, R.A., bowed his head humbly. He did not fight for glory. He fought for truth. But even so, his name would echo through history. The Quraysh had feared him. The Muslims had found strength in him. And from that day forward, his legend would live forever. The ultimate sacrifice, martyrdom at Uhud. The sky over Mount Uhud was red with dust, and the sound of clashing swords echoed across the valley. It was the second great battle between the Quraysh and the Muslims. But this time, things were different. The Quraysh had come with vengeance in their hearts. They wanted to erase the humiliation of Badr. And for one woman, Hind bint Itbah, this battle was personal. She wanted Hazrat Hamza, R.A., dead. The battle begins. The Quraysh outnumbered the Muslims 3-1, yet the believers fought with unmatched courage. And once again, at the front of the Muslim army stood Hazrat Hamza, R.A., the Lion of Allah. His sword cut through the enemy ranks like fire through dry grass. Wherever he went, warriors fell before him. For Islam, for the Prophet saw, his voice roared across the battlefield. The Quraysh trembled at the sight of him. But in the shadows, someone was watching him closely. A silent predator, a hidden assassin, the treachery a washer. Far from the chaos of the battle, a man named Washer crouched behind a rock, gripping his spear. He was an Abyssinian slave, a master of a spear, trained to kill from a distance. His owner, Jubair ibn Mut'im, had promised him freedom, but only if he killed Hamza. Hind bin Itbah, standing nearby, whispered, "Remember Washer. I want him dead. Strike true." Washer nodded, his eyes never leaving Hazrat Hamza. He had no hatred for the man. He was not fighting for Quraysh. He was fighting for his own freedom. The fatal blow. Hazrat Hamza fought like a lion, his sword slicing through enemy after enemy. But then a shadow moved. A spear flew through the air, spinning like a deadly arrow. Before Hazrat Hamza could turn, the spear struck him below the navel. The force of the blow drove deep into his body, piercing through him. A sharp pain shot through his chest. His sword slipped from his fingers. He staggered, his breath caught in his throat. He looked down at the spear lodged in his body. For the first time in his life, the mighty lion had been wounded. A warrior's last stand. Even with the spear in his body, Hazrat Hamza did not fall immediately. With his last strength, he turned toward Washer, who had stepped out of the shadows. "You fight from the darkness like a coward," he gasped, gripping the spear, trying to pull it out. Washer stepped back, fear in his eyes. But before Hamza could take another step, his legs gave way. The mighty warrior, the uncle of the Prophet, the Lion of Allah, fell to his knees. His vision blurred. He heard the clash of swords around him. He heard the cries of the believers. And then, with a final breath, he whispered, "Ya Allah, accept my sacrifice." And he fell. The cruel revenge of Hind. The battle raged on, but the Quraysh soon realized something shocking. The Muslims were winning. The Quraysh broke ranks and began to flee. Victory was near. But then, a fatal mistake. The Muslim archers, who had been ordered to guard the hill, left their positions to collect war spoils. And in that moment, the Quraysh attacked from behind. The Muslims were caught off guard. Chaos erupted. Many warriors fell in the ambush. The tide of battle shifted instantly. And then the unthinkable happened. The Prophet Muhammad was wounded. Rumors spread. The Prophet is dead. Panic took hold of the Muslims. Some fled. Some lost hope. And amid the chaos, Hind bint Utbah walked across the battlefield, searching for a body. The body of Hazrat Hamza, R.A. When she found him, she smiled cruelly. "You killed my father at Badr," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Now I take my revenge." And then she did something monstrous. She took out a dagger. She cut open his chest. And then she took out his liver and bit into it. The act was barbaric, cruel, a crime beyond imagination. The Lion of Allah, who had once roared across battlefields, now lay silent. The Prophet's grief. When the battle ended, the Muslims searched for their fallen brothers. The Prophet Muhammad walked through the battlefield, his heart heavy with sorrow. He had already lost many of his closest companions. But when he saw the body of his beloved uncle, mutilated beyond recognition, he wept. Tears streamed down his face. His body trembled with grief. "Oh Hamza," he whispered, kneeling beside him. "Who has done this to you?" His hands clenched into fists. For the first time, the Prophet's sorrow turned to anger. "By Allah, if I ever find them, I will punish them as they have punished you," he vowed. But then a revelation came from Allah. "O Prophet, forgive them, as you are sent as a mercy to mankind." The Prophet took a deep breath. His anger cooled. And then he did something no one expected. He forgave. Even Hind. Even Washer. Years later, Washer would accept Islam, repenting for his actions. And Hind, too, would eventually embrace the faith she once fought against. Such was the mercy of the Prophet, But the loss of Hazrat Hamza left a wound that never healed. To this day, his name stands as a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and unshakable faith. He was not just a warrior. He was the Lion of Allah, and his roar still echoes in history. Legacy of a lion. He fought for truth. He died with honor, and his sacrifice strengthened Islam forever. As long as the name of Islam is remembered, so will be the name of Hazrat Hamza, R.A. For lions never die. They live on in the hearts of those who follow their path. The roar that never fades, Hazrat Hamza's legacy. The battlefield of Uhud lay silent. The dust had settled, the cries of war had faded, but one name still echoed through the hearts of the believers, Hazrat Hamza, R.A., the Lion of Allah. His body had fallen, but his sacrifice had ignited a flame that would never die. The Prophet Muhammad stood over his beloved uncle's grave, his eyes filled with sorrow yet shining with determination. "There has never been a warrior like Hamza," he said, "and there never will be." But even he could not have known then how true those words would become, a sacrifice that inspired generations. Hazrat Hamza, R.A., did not just fall as a warrior. He rose as a legend. His martyrdom sent shockwaves through history, shaping the very foundation of Islamic courage. For years to come, whenever the believers faced oppression, they remembered the man who had bled for the truth. When the Muslims were persecuted in Mecca, they whispered his name for strength. When the army of Islam marched forward in battles, they carried his fearless spirit with them. When the flag of Islam spread to distant lands, his story gave warriors the courage to stand against tyranny. Even Khalid bin Walid, the future sword of Allah, who had once fought against the Muslims at Uhud, would later say, "Had I known Islam before Uhud, I would have stood beside Hamza, not against him." This was the power of his sacrifice, the man who defied death. But the most astonishing part of Hazrat Hamza's story is this: he never truly died. Yes, his body was taken from this world. But his legacy? It only grew stronger. The Quraysh thought that by killing him, they had won a victory. But instead, his martyrdom only made Islam stronger. His sacrifice became a rallying cry for the believers. It was no longer just about battlefields. It was about faith, justice, and standing firm against oppression, no matter the cost. His blood became the ink that wrote one of the greatest lessons in Islamic history. A true warrior does not fight for power or wealth. He fights for truth, even if it means giving up his life. His place among the greatest martyrs. Hazrat Hamza, R.A., stands among the greatest martyrs in history. His name is mentioned with honor alongside Hazrat Umar, R.A., the fearless leader assassinated in prayer. Hazrat Ali, R.A., the Lion of Allah who fell to treachery. Hazrat Hussein, R.A., the grandson of the Prophet SAW, who stood against tyranny at Karbala. Like them, he did not seek death, but when the moment came, he embraced it with open arms, knowing that his life was never truly his own. It belonged to Allah. And because of this, his story is not just history. It is a lesson, a warning, a message for every believer, a message for today's believers. The world today is different from the deserts of Arabia, yet the battle between truth and falsehood remains the same. Tyranny still exists, oppression still rises, and the weak still suffer. So what would Hazrat Hamza, R.A., say if he were here today? Would he tell us to remain silent? To accept injustice? Never. His life was a declaration. A believer never bows to falsehood. His death was a reminder. True courage is standing for what is right, even if the world stands against you. And his legacy? It whispers to every Muslim, even today. Will you be fearless like Hamza? Will you stand for truth, no matter the cost? For the roar of the Lion of Allah has never faded. It lives in the hearts of those brave enough to listen.